The United States military is often described as the strongest in the world. Yet, critics argue that it is also one of the most risk-averse. Some will even go as far as saying one of the most cowardly. The United States cannot take pain like the Russians. The pattern is there throughout history. The United States rarely enters a war unless the odds are overwhelmingly in its favor. The last time America fought a truly near-peer, fully mobilized war was during the Second World War. Since then, before committing to major conflict, it has typically ensured overwhelming superiority, technologically, numerically, economically, and logistically. And when unexpected resistance fundamentally alters the political or military cost of a war, Washington has shown a willingness to tuck tail and run. Vietnam is one of the clearest examples. During the Tet Offensive in 1968,
the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive was a shocking military campaign and the major turning point in the Vietnam War. On January 30th, 1968, the North Vietnamese Army and Southern Communist rebels known as the Viet Cong launched a number of coordinated attacks against the U.S. and South Vietnamese troops. The series of surprise attacks, named for their occurrence during the Lunar New Year, or Tet, led to a significant two-month struggle, altering the course of the Vietnam War.
The US and South Vietnamese forces ultimately defeated the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong militarily. However, the scale, coordination, and audacity of the offensive shocked the American public.
In February, one of the longest and bloodiest battles raged for over 3 weeks, the Battle of Hue. During this time, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers conducted house-to-house searches, arresting civil servants, teachers, religious leaders, and others connected to the United States or South Vietnamese government. The people rounded up were labeled counter-revolutionaries and executed. After the recapture of Hue, 2,800 bodies were found massacred, and 3,000 residents were reported missing. 150 Marines were killed, along with 400 South Vietnamese troops. North Vietnam suffered even heavier casualties, losing 5,000 men.
The psychological and political consequences inside the United States outweighed the battlefield outcome. Although Tet was a military setback for North Vietnam, it became a strategic turning point. By 1973, the United States withdrew its combat forces, not because it had been militarily crushed in a conventional sense, but because the domestic political costs and military costs had become unsustainable. A similar miscalculation occurred earlier in the Korean War. General Douglas MacArthur, supported by his intelligence chief, Major General Charles Willoughby, and elements within the CIA, concluded that China would not intervene in the Korean War. Confident and dismissive of Chinese capability, MacArthur believed that even if China entered the war, it would be swiftly defeated. That assumption proved catastrophic. When the US and UN forces crossed the 38th parallel and advanced towards the Yalu River, near China's border, they directly threatened Chinese security interests. In October and November 1950, roughly 300,000 troops from Chinese People's Volunteer Army launched a massive surprise offensive. UN forces were caught off guard and forced into a chaotic retreat. Seoul was recaptured by Chinese and North Korean troops in January 1951.
The remaining North Koreans fled across the 38th parallel, the border between the two countries. UN forces pursued them and continued to push them all the way to the Yalu River, which was the natural border with China. Their front had been stabilized. The premier of the People's Republic of China, Zhou Enlai, and Mao both took decisive action. On October 19, 1950, the Chinese secretly crossed the Yalu River with the 13th Army Group and launched the first phase of their operation, attacking the advancing UN forces near the Sino-Korean border on October 25th. This military decision, made solely by China, forced Stalin to provide air support 12 days later and send more military aid to China. On November 27th, the People's Volunteer Army's 9th Army Group initiated the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. Their plan was to encircle the UN troops and destroy them in place. The surprise attack across the 38th parallel by 30 Chinese divisions, roughly 300,000 soldiers, was a shock to the Allied command, especially as MacArthur had assured Truman that the Chinese would never get involved without air support.
Although UN forces later pushed the front line back near the 38th parallel, the war devolved into a brutal stalemate that lasted until 1953 armistice. The failure to anticipate Chinese intervention, combined with MacArthur's public call to expand the war into China, including suggestions of atomic weapons use, led President Harry S. Truman to remove him from command in 1951. Once again, here, the US couldn't continue the war once an army with somewhat near equal capability entered the fight. Another deterrent to American military belligerence is nuclear deterrence. When the opposing power possesses nuclear weapon, the calculation changes entirely. Direct war risks mutual destruction, and the Americans do not want to be mutually destroyed. They want to be the ones doing the destruction. The most dramatic example is the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. For 13 days, the world stood on the brink of nuclear war. After a U-2 spy plane discovered Soviet missile sites in Cuba, President John F. Kennedy conveyed his advisors and imposed a naval quarantine rather than launching an immediate invasion.
To help guide him through the crisis, Kennedy would set up XCOM, a group of his most influential and trusted advisors. As the group debated, it soon became clear that Kennedy had two options open to him. He could either set up a naval blockade around Cuba to prevent further Soviet shipments from arriving, or he could use airstrikes to take out the missile sites before they could be completed. After days of debate, Kennedy would decide that the blockade was the better option. It was far less likely to provoke a conflict and would open the way for negotiation.
Tensions peaked on Black Saturday when a U-2 was shot down and a Soviet submarine nearly launched a nuclear torpedo, an action prevented by Officer Vasily Arkhipov. Ultimately, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev agreed to withdraw the missiles. Both sides agreed to step back because the consequences of escalation were existential, and the Americans love to exist. The same nuclear logic helps explain later restraint. In 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, the United States did not intervene militarily. In the current war in Ukraine, Washington has provided extensive support but avoided direct combat with Russian forces. Similarly, North Korea's nuclear capability has largely insulated it from direct American military action. Across these cases, Vietnam, Korea, Cuba, Crimea, Ukraine, and North Korea, the pattern critics identify is consistent. The United States demonstrates overwhelming force where it calculates decisive superiority. When confronted with unexpected resistance, domestic political backlash, or nuclear-armed adversaries, it recalibrates or withdraws. Whether this reflects cowardice, strategic caution, or pragmatic realism depends entirely on one's perspective.